the Mind Tribe. Time to unlock your consciousness and set your mind free. The truth shall set you free.
A being that came out of the ship on the Roswell crash was holding this box in his hands. And so some of them lived, okay? One of them, I guess, died pretty fast. Another one ended up living for a while, and they called him EB, or Extraterrestrial Biological Entity. For those of you who've studied ufology, this is old and boring, so I'm not going to go into detail. But what you may not know is that EB, or one of his buddies, was holding onto this little box, and they got a hold of the box, and what they discovered was that when you interface with it with your consciousness, these are all consciousness-assisted technologies. The box opens up like the petals of a flower, and then inside is this weird, colorful grid. I think I have a slide where you're going to see this. And then above the box is an image that's like a three-dimensional hologram, and it's beautiful. It's very crisp, very sharp, very clear. And this apparently was the navigation system for the craft. It was a consciousness-assisted navigation system. This is consciousness technology. So you think about where you might want to go in space and ultimately in time, and then the hologram will show you that approximate location. If you decide, yes, that's where I want to go, you will the ship to fly to that location. The ship has a system which, as it turns out, is based in the seat. All you need is the seat from the UFO. This is the Montauk Project, which we're going to talk about later, and my whistleblower. I'm going to give you his real name for the first time and all the stuff that he didn't want me to tell you about himself until he had died. That's part of why I'm doing this, okay? And you're going to see his picture, and this is a world exclusive. Anyway, what he said was that a portal will open up in front of the ship as you think about where you want to go, and then you fly through the portal and you arrive where you need to go. So the cube was some type of navigation system that allowed you to visualize where you want to go, and then you make the decision and you make the trip. But the cube apparently could be brought out, and it's not like they had wires. I mean, come on, it's wireless. So it's sitting there on the dashboard. You think about where you want to go, and whoop, there you go. So fascinating beyond belief, because they discovered very quickly that they could think about the future, and they could see the future with the what they called the Orion Cube, or it was also called the Roswell Cube, but mostly it was called the Orion Cube. So when you thought about the future, you would see a potential future, but it was a particular part of reality that may or may not actually happen depending upon the choices that we make now. In other words, nobody really can fully predict the future. You can only look at probable windows of time and look at what is the strongest timeline that magnetizes the most amount of probability that that's going to happen. Now, many of the insiders who I've spoken to throughout my career, several of whom did not talk to anyone else in the entire UFO community, frankly, because they didn't trust them. They only trusted me because I didn't betray anyone. I heard multiple insiders talk to me about layered time. And this is how they try to conceptualize this, that there's these different layers of time that are stacked on top of each other, and they're all existing in simultaneity. They're all there in some parallel universe, some parallel reality. And the choices that we make moment by moment determine which timeline we magnetize. And that's really, really trippy and really, really cool. So they were able to use this Orion Cube to look into the future and to see probable windows of time. And there are other systems like Project Looking Glass that actually do the same thing, in which Project Looking Glass, and I'm sure I have slides for this, it's modeled off of the pineal gland. I've said this many times, so again, I won't repeat myself. You can go back and watch previous videos on this channel. I did cover it in one of the big 5-hour ones that I did here a few months back in April, I believe, where the pineal gland is just a hollow area in the geographic, if you will, or the geometric center of your brain. It's right in the middle. It has more blood flow going through it than any other part of the body, and all that's inside is floating water with little crystals in it. And there's very strong evidence from guys like Dr. Rick Strassman that some of those crystals are dimethyltryptamine or DMT. So one of the things that I got really excited about was that the man who had made more synthetic DMT than anyone else in the world would dry it out into a dish, and he'd hit it with a hammer, and big flashes of color would come out, colored light from the DMT. And it could change. You could hit it with a hammer once and you get blue light, you hit it with a hammer again, you get red light, you hit it with a hammer again, you get yellow light, and on and on and on. Well, there's a very unique name for that in science. It's called piezochromatism, in which you have a compression of a crystal which then releases light in the form of photons, which in this case can be apparently any color in the rainbow spectrum. And it varies just, I guess, if you really got technical, it would have to do with how you hit it with a hammer and all that kind of stuff. Anyway, what does this mean? This means that apparently the pineal gland is using this somehow. It's using the piezochromatic properties of DMT, which your body naturally has. So what can happen for you is that you can be meditating. And the big secret is, and I talked about this in my first book, Source Field Investigations, or in Britain it's called Hidden Science of Lost Civilizations. The interior of the pineal gland, the whole interior of it, is coated with these little cells called pinealocytes that are identical, basically identical to the rods and cones in the retina of your eye. What in the world are rods and cones doing inside your pineal gland? And best of all, there's a brain circuit that they found that goes straight from that pineal gland to the visual cortex in the brain, exactly the same as the one that comes out of your eyes. So it is a third eye, it does have retinal tissue, and it does have crystals inside that at least theoretically can release colored light and send it through into the visual cortex. Now, one of the other insiders I'm going to be talking about today, the late Dr. Pete Peterson, actually described work that he did in secret government programs where with people who are alive, they drilled a little hole in your head and they sent a fiber optic cable inside your pineal gland, and apparently they were able to see the full color visual images coming through your pineal gland before they got captured by the rods and cones and before they got descrambled to whatever efficacy by your visual cortex. You have to close your eyes, you have to meditate, and you start getting these fleeting visual images. Usually when you get something through your pineal gland, it's a snapshot. It takes a lot of training and a lot of discipline to slow that down so that it's not just a split second and you can see it for a longer period of time. If you meditate enough and you practice enough, you can get to that, okay? But the really cool benefit of Project Looking Glass is that you can see what's inside somebody else's pineal gland because there is some sort of quantum correlation that takes place between the activity in your pineal gland and the activity in the machine. And of course, again, this is an extraterrestrial, highly advanced technology. As Arthur C. Clarke once said, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. So if you had time travelers going back into the past and they had a little screen that they were using, somebody might call that a magic mirror because they don't know what the heck an iPhone is. They don't know how you showed them that video, whatever. So, and time travel does appear to be happening. And we've gotten some really, really compelling new briefings on this, which is why that's what I titled this talk. When we look at all the evidence, when we put all the pieces together, the reason why Looking Glass worked is that they had this barrel that was in the same shape as the pineal gland, and inside the barrel was water like they had in the pineal gland. The other thing that I heard, which is sad really, is that the other ingredient to make Looking Glass work is ground up dust Get a load of this now. You can laugh. I'm giving you permission to laugh, okay? Because that's how you got to access new information if you haven't heard me say this before. Ground up dust from extraterrestrial mummies. Because apparently extraterrestrial physiology, extraterrestrial DNA, extraterrestrial genetics allows for a much higher degree of psychic energy throughput, if you will. It's like the difference between a dial-up modem versus insane fast broadband. So apparently, if you grind up the dust of one of these extraterrestrial mummies, the sheer energetic power of that DNA is what makes this technology work. So they duplicate the conditions in the pineal gland, because the other thing I didn't say is the way the pineal gland works, and this is what Dr. Pete Peterson was studying, is that you get these electromagnetic effects. It's like this whirling, all this stuff. Like if my head's the pineal gland right now, let's say, there's all these electromagnetic fields going around different directions, and they get faster and faster. And you can actually feel that when you're meditating. It's like a vibrational rush. And you just feel this, whoa, it's like your skin starts tingling. Sometimes you feel a pressure in your head. That's when your pineal gland is firing up. It's like like you got that snowblower or the lawnmower. You finally pull on, it gets going. As that stuff spins around, what is it doing? It's creating a Faraday cage. It's creating electromagnetic shielding so that there's no electromagnetic energy, no radio frequencies, no TV, no cell frequencies, nothing getting inside your pineal gland. At that point, when it's electromagnetically shielded, the DMT apparently kicks in, and it allows you to start accessing these realms of consciousness, and it goes outside of linear time. So the way that they duplicated this, whoever invented this, apparently it was from an ancient civilization dating back at least 12,000 years ago. That was their conclusion. The dreaded A word, Atlantis, right? This technology would somehow create a quantum coupling, a quantum correlation with whoever is standing in front of the machine. So nobody could get too close. Only the guy that's going to run the thing. You got to be a good meditator. So then when you try to think about what areas in the future you want to look at, it's all visible on this display, because the machine has these rings that spin around the barrel. There's 3 rings. They spin around the barrel. They create that electromagnetic shielding, and then it's all encased inside a bubble that's filled with argon gas. And argon, there's some very interesting things related to argon when you get into the work of Dr. Kenneth Shoulders and his amazing charge cluster technology, which is probably, it's one of the main contenders of what we're going to use to build hover cars, because you can create anti-gravity with these little things. It turns out that if you send electrical current, sorry I'm jumping around a little bit, but hang in with me. If you send electrical current down a needle and it comes off the point of the needle, you get this little ball of energy. And the ball of energy has all these very strange properties that shouldn't happen. It has way more electrostatic charge than it normally would. So it's got much, much greater energy in a much smaller package than it normally would, and it repels gravity. Plus, if you generate these charge clusters and you pass them through radioactive material, you deradiate the material. So when we start using charge cluster technology, we get free energy, because these things, if you generate a whole bunch of them, you get a lot of free energy out of it, more than it seems to take to generate, which is really true. That's just the nature of how charge clusters form. They attract more energy than it takes to make them, and then they emanate that energy. So they generate energy, they generate a gravitational pull that you can either push or pull with it. And they also are, again, deradiating radioactive material when you pass it through the material. So as I've talked about in other videos, I'm not going to run through all of it again. There have been these declassified patents filed by a man apparently named Salvatore Pais, and they are for a device called the HAUC, H-A-U-C, Hybrid Air Underwater Craft. And it's basically a flying black triangle, and the patent describes exactly how to build it and says that it is anti-gravitic. And in the other videos I've done, we have compelling evidence that they've already built these, they know how they work. And Salvatore Pais also patented a compact fusion reactor It's all these little needles that whirl around, which is how you make charge clusters, okay? And that is a power system you could drop in the thing. The other thing I talked about before is that the Hawk craft is like a peanut. So there's a nut inside and then a shell on the outside, and that hollow area between the interior hull and the exterior hull, there's all these little needles where they can generate the charge clusters. So you generate them and then you steer them, and by first generating them, you then point them where you want to go, and that's how you get anti-gravity. I'm very, very excited about the technology that we're going to have, and again, it's been handed to us. The military is handed to us, and as I've said before, Salvatore Pius translates as Savior of our nation. Salvatore, Savior. Pius, I'm not sure how to pronounce it. I'm sorry, I'm probably mangling it. Pius means nation or country. So why would the military save our country by releasing these patents? Well, I think it's pretty obvious. We've talked about Space Force. I've done a lot of other videos suggesting that this forbidden technology is going to be part of what we're going to get. All right, so now we're really going to get into the good stuff here. So my first high-level insider, who I actually got personal access to, was Daniel. And Daniel, actually, I began talking about him and his work in roughly 2004 or 5. But there's a lot of things that you don't know. And so I'm going to kind of unveil some of this for you because very tragically and unfortunately, Daniel died this year. And he died around, I guess it was February 4th or somewhere right around that time, early February. I did get a chance to interview him here in this room, but it was by telephone. I had to hold up my cell phone to the microphone. I was looking at the levels to make sure that they were good. And he basically spilled the whole story, and he was amazingly verbally articulate. He was on a lot of medication because he was dying from cancer, so his voice slurs a little. But even so, he's amazingly articulate, spoke very, very quickly. Now, I'm going to tell you more about him because, as it turns out, this is who he really is. His real name is Dr. Bruce Perrett. And here he is later in his life when he was working as a security guard. Now, he never, ever allowed me to take a picture of him, and so I don't have any pictures of him, and in all of the internet, there's only 2 other pictures of him in existence, and they're both really bad if you want to see his eyes. So this is the first picture of Bruce, and this comes off of a particular website dedicated to something, this physics he was working on called the reciprocal system. And here's another picture of Bruce where you can kind of see him smiling more. So this insider claimed that he was working on the Phoenix 3 project from 1981 to 1983. Now, what is that? The Phoenix 3 project is what most people call Montauk. So Montauk is allegedly a program in which a seat out of a UFO from one of these crash retrievals that, by the way, now they've officially acknowledged they have them, folks. Okay, so this stuff is starting to sound less crazy because they've already told you that there's a UFO that they got. There's multiple UFOs they got, probably different makes and models from different people, different places, right? Different technology. Wouldn't you expect that if it has anti-gravity, that there's all kinds of cool technology in there that we don't know about right now? And if it is true that by shielding gravity that you shield time and you have a time machine, by definition, an anti-gravity machine is a time machine. Apparently, when you shield off your gravity, this is the big, big secret that everybody knows in the inside world. When you shield off your gravity, you also shield off the flow of time. And now, time doesn't move for you in that local area. Now, Einstein would have disagreed with that. Einstein would say that time is locally invariant. That's the technical physics term for it. But local invariance is wrong. Now, Einstein also kind of got around it by invoking something called frame dragging, where like the space-time fabric, as he calls it, is traveling along with you as you move through space. And so as you move through space, you're also moving through time. This is why Einstein would say that as you go towards light speed, that you're also slowing down time so that if you went back to where you came from after taking a light speed journey, it's the future, like way in the future, and everybody you knew and loved is gone. So there was a whole, there's been a whole dialogue about that, but it's as if you could only go forward in time. That's not really actually true. If you shield gravity, you can either go forward or backward in time just by traveling in a direction. And it has to do with if you travel ahead of where the Earth was when you left, you go into the future. And if you travel behind where the Earth was when you left, you go into the past. See, the Earth is revolving in a certain direction. If you travel ahead of that revolution and then you come back down, you arrive in the future. If you travel behind that revolution and you come back down, you arrive in the past. Another thing they apparently found as they got into this anti-gravity and they studied these machines is that there are these eddy currents in the flow of gravity that represent essentially different dimensions. In other words, dimensionalities are enfolded in the gravitational field. Higher dimensions, other dimensions, are inside gravity. And some of these dimensions actually have time flowing backwards. So you can change the vibratory rate of the anti-gravity that you're producing, and you can get into these different zones where you can go into different parts of time. Okay? I'm going to have a lot more to talk about this, but what Daniel revealed was that the first 2 books written by Preston Nichols and Peter Moon, called the Montauk Project, are 100% true. And the reason is that he actually worked for Preston Nichols at this Brookhaven National Labs in Long Island. Now the official Brookhaven location on the map is west of Montauk Point, but of course they have an underground tunnel system, and apparently the way they paid for this program was with German gold after World War II that they smuggled in with submarines that they still had, and that provided the collateral to do this thing. He said that it was run by Brookhaven National Labs. They're going to deny it. Okay, that's fine. But that's what he said. Brookhaven ran the program. Okay? Now, what did they do? They got a hold of a seat from one of these crash retrievals, which the Pentagon and the New York Intelligencer and Luis Elizondo and all the partial disclosure folks are now saying, yep, we got crash disks. It's true. It's real. Okay. We already talked about the Roswell cube or the Orion cube. You hold it in your hands, you think about something, and you see the hologram shows you where it is. And then a wormhole opens up in front of your ship. You fly through it and you go to that place. Now, Bruce, his real name is Bruce, or Daniel, we can call him either one. Bruce actually was hired there in 1981. And he didn't know what the hell was going on for a long time. It was very compartmentalized. So what happened was they handed him a series of waveforms, and they wanted him to build a computer that would generate the exact same sequence of waves at the same rate and frequency. And there's apparently like 200 waves. Well, eventually, he got to see that there was this big bundle about this big of fiber optic cables coming through the wall, and each of the fiber optic cables had a different one of these waves on it. Well, eventually, he was allowed to go into the room where the fiber optic cables were coming from, and they were all connected to a seat that looked very futuristic, and they told him that it came from a crashed extraterrestrial recovered disk. But that was later in the program. It turns out that all you have to do is have a person sit in the chair and then blank out their mind, and they had a whole elaborate protocol that they taught people how to do this, okay? Their name for it is the quiet point. You find the quiet point within yourself. You blank out your mind, you find the quiet point. They have these 22 different, 21 or 20, I think it's 22 different main baseline frequencies the chair is giving off through these fiber optic cables. And they have this series of oscilloscopes, something like an oscilloscope where you see the wave that the person's mind is generating. Once they get really internally quiet, the waves stop moving. The best guy was Duncan Cameron, and they almost always had to use Duncan. Nobody else was good enough to do it the way he did. And of course, Bruce interacted with Duncan at great length, as he did with Al Bielek, who he said told a lot of lies and false things, which is very sad. Preston Nichols was there. Anyway, you would, once the person's mind hit quiet point, you'd have these 22 sine waves, and you'd turn these dials and you'd zero out the chair. All the sine waves now have to be flat, okay? At that point, this is where the magic happens. Once you calibrate the chair for the operator, if they think about a particular place, a portal opens up that will take you to that place. And if they think about a particular place and time, the portal will take you to that place and time, which is exactly the same function that the chair would have when it was in the UFO. It was a time machine. All UFOs are time machines by definition. If you shield gravity, you have a time machine, period. So there's some really, really cool stuff to talk about with all that. The original German secret space program was codenamed Kronos because the Die Glocke, or the bell, the little crafts they were making, they realized that when they used them that they were traveling through time. It becomes very obvious very quickly that you get a time slip by shielding off your gravity. So again, this sounds like it's very difficult to understand, but the physics of time travel nonetheless are true and real, and the technology works, and they've been using it for a really long time. So the plan, we're jumping way ahead now, but the plan, if you know the code name or the pro word, the plan, if you've heard me talk about that, that's the idea from the 1950s of how the mass arrests will happen and how we get our planet back. That apparently has been transmitted from our own future, where we in the military-industrial complex, we humans on Earth, however it was done, have been sending this thing back in time, the plans on how to do this, through these very, very unique quantum correlated devices, or QCDs, as I'm choosing to call them, the QCD. We're going to get more into that. Okay, so let's get into the Bruce story. The real story is that I was at L&L Research, and I was staying there with Jim McCarty and Carla Rucker, the people who did the Law of One, okay? And I'd lived there since March of 2003, I guess, or maybe February, because there was an event called the Homecoming. No, it was earlier than that, because the Homecoming event was in January, and so I actually basically didn't leave. I did the Homecoming, I went back to Virginia Beach, I packed up all my stuff, and I moved to Louisville, Kentucky. And I moved in with Jim and Carla, and I lived there for like a year, almost 2 years. Bruce showed up in December, and that's where, and he knew that the Law of One was the only thing that he'd ever read that seemed to articulate what he had learned in these programs. So that's where he first told me that he worked at Montauk, and I literally laughed in his face. I said, Montauk is BS, and I didn't say it that way. I laughed in his face, a big belly laugh. I worked for Preston Nichols, it's true, you can laugh if you want to, but that was real, that book is real. I said, oh, come on, man, come on. But it was only because he spent so much time talking to me about it that within about an hour of our first conversation, I'm like, wait a minute, this is way too weird, it's way too specific, he's got way too many details, and again, he's never sought publicity, he never said his real name, he never said that he was the same guy as Montauk Daniel. I mean, I guess if you really, really dug around for it, a couple people online apparently found it, his identity, but it was not anything he wanted me to talk about. He wouldn't let me photograph him, he wouldn't let me film him, and even before he died, I wanted to go out there and film him, and I was only able to get a telephone interview before he passed from cancer. So he was working at this place, and they're handing him these graphs, and they're saying, can you build a computer that makes these wavelengths? So at first, he did it digitally, but it didn't work. And they just said, no, we're not getting the results we need. And at a certain point, what they eventually found out was that when you have a digital graph, it's always going to be like a stairwell. It goes in stair-step patterns. So the wave is actually going to look like this on a big level, but then on a tiny level, it's going like this. 90-degree turns, because it's either a 1 or a 0. So they brought him in, and they started to tell him some things after he'd already been figuring out what was going on, because even before that, he was in the cafeteria, and you would literally see this kind of shimmery thing. It looks like the mirage coming off of a road, and the shimmery thing is a portal, and there will be a totally different place on the other side. So one of the problems they had in the beginning with the chair is that they couldn't stabilize where the portal would appear. And so there were people that were not on a need-to-know basis, and they were in the cafeteria, and then Bruce started to notice that guys would just pick up their trays and walk over and walk away from the portal and then keep talking like nothing happened. The first way that he started to figure out what was going on is the janitor. It turns out that people were hanging out with the janitor, talking to the janitor at Montauk Point and at Brookhaven, because the two, again, were interconnected. And the janitor started to talk. So that's how Bruce originally learned what they were doing there. At some point, they brought him in and they said, we need to tell you what we're really doing because we can't figure out how to make this work. We want you to play these waves back accurately because these waves are coming out of a person's mind, and his name is Duncan Cameron, and this is how we're running a machine that opens up portals that let you go through space and time. Isn't that cool or what? Come on, I'll show you. Let's take a look. So that bundle of fiber optic cables, he got to see the other side of the room because they brought him into his room. He could touch the fiber optics and stuff while he was working. So he went into the other room, and the fiber optics went into the chair, and here's this guy, and then he sees the portal, and he sees somebody go through, and they close the door, and the portal closes, and then, time travel is happening. One of the things that the new briefings have revealed, which I didn't realize, and this is something Bruce wasn't privy to, is that very early in this process, starting in 1981, there was Phoenix 1, Phoenix 2, and Phoenix 3. So it took them a lot of work to get up to the point of getting that chair online so that it would actually function in its capacity. They needed an enormous power supply, huge power transformers, much greater than you'd expect. Once they gave it the right power at the right frequency, which is in the Montauk books, the first two, you would have this person zero out in the chair, think about a place, and the portal opens up, and it would take you there if you send somebody through it. They were apparently rounding up people who were homeless and sending them through the portals and just see what happens, see if they come back. And most of them didn't come back. So they eventually figured out we got to build something to track them. And what they built, as the new briefings have revealed, is these spheres that were about 14 inches wide, and they're chrome and metallic. And inside the sphere are these porcelain balls that spin around, and they create anti-gravity, which again, they've had all this time with these crash retrievals to figure out how that works. The balls are surveillance devices, and they're quantum correlated surveillance devices, so you can send them into the past, and they will actually send video and audio to the present. So you can send that, you can create one of these portals with the Montauk chair, send the sphere in, and have it look around, and then send somebody there when you decide that this is a good place to go. And the spheres, of course, are also invisible, and they're a little bit out of phase with matter, so you can't really touch them, okay? They also, let's talk about the quantum correlated device for a second. Time does not exist. Time is an illusion, and this becomes a very practical reality as you're studying how all this stuff works. So the way that time actually functions is that it's a flow contained in gravity, but it's not really there. Gravity is what makes it appear to be there. If you change the rate of the flow of gravity, you change the rate of time, and if you shield gravity, you go into this parallel reality where you can travel around, and as you travel through space, you're actually traveling through time. And so Bruce ended up studying this time travel thing. So here's the next thing I want to show you. Bruce was so amazed by the stuff that he learned when he was in this program that he actually dedicated his life to studying the physics of time travel. And the best physics that he found was from a guy named Dr. Dewey Larson, and it was called reciprocal system, where he says that there is a reciprocal relationship between space and time. Now, I will be the first to admit, and I do this proudly, okay, that Bruce's understanding of physics was vastly beyond anything that I could wrap my head around. And he would say, it's a speed. And then he was always talking about ratios, and it's space over time, and time over space. And so basically, I mean, I don't want to try to go down the Dewey Larson rabbit hole. When I wrote Source Field Investigations or Hidden Science of Ancient Civilizations, whichever country you're in, I went into a lot of detail, and there's a lot of science, and maybe in the future I'll start unpacking that into more videos because I've never really covered it before. But what we're dealing with is that time and space are essentially two different versions of the same stuff. And the stuff, you know, in Larson's science, it's only called time. Now, the law of one says, the law of one endorsed Larson's physics because Dr. Don Elkins, who was the guy asking the questions in these sessions, with an alleged extraterrestrial intelligence, that's allegedly what was talking through Carla Ruckert, he would ask these questions about Larsonian physics. So the whole book, too, is very difficult to read because it's all this physics stuff that's extremely difficult to understand. So I finally did the due diligence on that in my first book that was published and talked about the physics of time and space and how they intersect. But in the simplest possible terms, the basic idea is, how in the world could Einstein say that time is one-dimensional? There is no one-dimension anything. You're in a three-dimensional reference frame. You can't make anything one-dimensional. Anytime you're moving your finger through space, you're moving through a three-dimensional space, length, width, and height. Your planet is revolving, it's rotating on its axis, it's revolving around the sun is revolving around the center of the galaxy, right? You're always in motion. All of that motion is what creates your perception of the flow of time. If you shield that gravity, that motion no longer gives you a time reference point, and now you slip into another time frame, okay? So that's how apparently it works. In the simplest possible terms, gravity is what keeps you stuck in 3 dimensions of space with time apparently moving in only one direction. When you turn the gravity off, now you're in 3-dimensional time where you can move around and you have all these degrees of freedom. So Einstein really actually misled us by saying time is the 4th dimension. Larson said time is 3-dimensional. He has amazing physics to prove it. And as I said in my first book, he proved a whole heck of a bunch of stuff that, you know, the fine structure constant, which is how an atom jiggles when it has an electron enter or leave. He solved all kinds of astrophysics problems. He solved all kinds of quantum problems, logarithmic this and that. I mean, just it's crazy. It gets so complicated. And I'm not going to drag you through it because I don't fully understand it. I haven't actually taken the time to really dig into it. But I dug into it enough to show, yeah, this definitely looks plausible and it definitely looks true. So he studied the Larsonian physics because that was the only physics that could actually explain this weird stuff that he saw in these programs. So that's why he dedicated himself to the science of physics. So anyway, as I said, Bruce came to L&L Research in December 2003. We started to talk, and I pretty quickly realized he was telling the truth, and this was the first time that I got incredibly excited as I learned all these things I'm telling you about right now. We actually lived together from October 2004 to January 2006. I paid for everything because he was fascinating me so much that I didn't need money. I was like, you just keep talking and you keep telling me this stuff and that's going to pay your way. So we actually moved in a little tiny sleepy town called Milton, Kentucky, which was only 1.5 miles away from L&L Research's separate plot of land that they called Avalon. During this time, the whole period of time, I interviewed him hundreds of times about the Montauk Project. We spoke about this every day, and every evening we watched several episodes of television together, and the 2 main things that he wanted me to see were Stargate SG-1 and a show called Babylon 5, which, again, it's a little lame, it's a little boring, but there's a lot of stuff in there that he claimed was true. He said that the extraterrestrials in the show are wrong, they don't look like that, but that the basic, whoever this guy was that did Babylon 5, and I forget his name off the top of my head, but that he obviously knew some really strange stuff. So like the Vorlons, when they're walking around with their masks, those appear to be the Draco reptilians. A lot of really strange stuff about bases where extraterrestrials get together, politics between different races, and apparently Babylon 5 was used to allow a ton of disclosure to come through. And so the other thing, of course, Stargate SG-1, going back to the slide again, both of these shows were just chock full of disclosure. Now, one of the things that he talked about with Babylon 5 that was the most fascinating to me was something that he called the Psi-Corps. Now, we were never entirely clear as to whether he knew that they were called the Psi-Corps or whether he made that term up. It does appear that that's what it was called, but this is another one of these really incredible stories because the Psi-Corps, so he claimed that First of all, when he was at the base, they came up to him at one point and they started talking to him about ESP. Have you had psychic experiences? Have you ever, thought about somebody and then they called you on the phone right afterwards or something like that? And he, yeah, I've had all that kind of stuff. And they said, well, here's the thing. Take this card, come to this room, 9 o'clock, Wednesday night. We're going to pay for it. You're going to get a training, if you want to have it, training in how to be more psychic. We're going to bring you in. We're going to teach you these really, really cool things, because ultimately, what do they need? They needed people to operate the chair, and they have to train you to be psychic so that you can use the chair, okay? So the first thing that happened was that he had this interview where he sat down with this man, and the man is having a seemingly ordinary conversation with him. And it's going to take a little explanation to get to this, but the man, at the same time that there's an ordinary conversation, the man is a very trained psychic, and he is psychically attacking Bruce in his mind. Now, if you don't actually, so the interview appears to be normal, all the real stuff is going on in the psychic plane. The only way you pass and they let you into the program is if in the middle of this, you start touching your head. What are you doing? What are you doing? You start yelling and really freaking out. Like, you're doing something to my head. Stop. What are you doing? Stop. Okay, if that's what happens, congratulations, you passed, because this guy is psychically attacking you. He's actually hurting you, and apparently when you get the training that they provide, this is what happens. So they can attack other people, and he said that depending upon what your specialty is, whether you're a telepath or a telekinetic, and again, only 1 out of 1,000 people they discovered were telekinetics, okay? But if you're a telekinetic, then they really like you, because now you can pinch the carotid artery in somebody's neck, restrict blood flow, and cause them to stroke out and die. So these are psychic assassins. If you're a telepath, they want to get you to do remote influencing, where if you are a successful graduate, that you could remote influence somebody to hurt themselves or kill themselves. It's very sad, and I'm sorry to even have to tell you this stuff, but this is what he told me, okay? I'm giving you the disclosure. So, they always have pro words. They don't want you to know what's really going on. So the pro words were teeps and teeks. So if you hear somebody talking and they say teeps and teeks, you don't know what the heck they're talking about. A teep is a telepath, and a teak is a telekinetic for TP, telepathy, and TK, telekinetic. Now what they would do is they would actually rank you in terms of how psychic you are on a scale that starts with a P0 through a P10. Now, the P scale actually is something that you can develop. So they had these special exercises that they trained people in to help them develop their psychic ability. The main exercise that you had to do the most often was lots and lots of meditation. And they also had a practice that you were supposed to do in meditation called clustering. Now think about the fact that people started to be able to move books and slam them against the wall with their minds when they learned this, if they were one of those 1 in 1,000 teaks, the telekinetic type. So otherwise, if you're a teep and you're one of those other 999, you're never going to be able to do telekinesis, unfortunately, because that would be fun. I mean, I would use it benevolently, but yeah, it would be really cool to be able to do that. So anyway, clustering means that when you're meditating, that you think about certain things, and then you associate, you find the things that you have an emotional charge for. So they might actually do this in an exercise with you where they sit down, and then they say, okay, how do you feel about a spoon? Then they say, okay, if you have an emotional charge around the spoon, what else does it make you think of? Well, the spoon makes me think of da-da-da-da. Well, what else does that make you think of? Well, that makes me think of da-da-da-da. So they would do this thing called clustering, where you have to analyze everything in your life that has an emotional charge and then find out what it's associated with, and then what's that associated with, and what's that associated with. And what they found was that everything clusters down to birth trauma and parent trauma. Everything basically comes back to that you as a child think that your parents are God, and God has abandoned you when they start saying no and you can't have that spoon anymore. They don't want to let you feed yourself. They take the spoon away. So ultimately the spoon is this emotional charge because they wouldn't feed you and they said no, and you start crying, and eventually you'll remember that. The other thing he said was that the dark night of the soul is incredibly important for the psychic training program. Talked about the reciprocity between space and time. So when you are having a dark night of the soul, they said that it is an implosion of your external reality. In other words, the normal stuff that you take for granted in your external reality is imploding. It's coming in on you. You feel compressed. You start to crouch. You start to feel bad inside. Okay? But then, as there is an implosion of your external reality, there is an explosion of your internal reality. Just like the physics is called reciprocal system, it's the reciprocal between space and time. There's a reciprocal between your outer world, your ego, your personality self, what you project to others, and then your inner world, who you really are, your spirit, your soul, your dreams, and that's where all this power comes from. So if you implode your external reality, you explode your internal reality. And this is where it gets really, really strange, because as your internal reality explodes, the actual size of your dream landscape gets bigger. This is a whole other amazing topic I've talked about before, so I won't repeat too much on this, but one of the other exercises that made people be able to do these amazing feats of consciousness is they would have you remember your dreams and then draw the landscape of what was in the dream. So you have to draw the layout of what you saw and where the objects are. And then what they teach you is that these objects represent parts of yourself. Everything in the dream is yourself. Every character is yourself. Every object is yourself. The landscape is you. And it's all symbolic. So when you meet this character, that symbolizes some part of yourself. If that character is somebody you knew when you were a kid, then it means that that's from that part of your life. So what they teach you is that the dream landscape is a representational landscape of the psyche. It represents your psyche. Everything in there has meaning for you. I talk about this extensively in the new book, Awakening the Dream, how all this works. I didn't really get into the Bruce stuff very much. I don't know if I covered it at all, actually, but I've done it in many other lectures. So anyway, another really weird thing that they talk about is some esoteric principle that they apparently had in secret mystery school teachings that they kept secret. And it's the arrow of time points in the direction you're facing. And this is also the secret of time travel. Time appears to be moving forward based on the direction that you are moving in. So your dream landscape might just be this little box, and you got little objects in the box that you draw, and when you go to these dreams, the objects won't be the same, but they'll be in the same location. That's what's so weird. The landscape stays the same, the objects have the same symbolic meaning, and as you have more of these dreams, the objects will show you different versions of the same symbols. And then in the dream, you travel through the landscape, and the arrow of time travels in the direction that you're facing. So as you walk through the landscape, you eventually come back to the beginning. That's a cycle, right? That's a cycle that you go through. But it appears now that you've gone back to the beginning that because you're facing this way, the arrow of time is still pointing ahead. So it's still the future. You don't realize that you've traveled back to the same spiritual lesson that you needed to learn before. So the psychic training program was very big on using your dreams, remembering your dreams, understanding what they're meaning, and applying it to yourself. And then you have the dark night of the soul at some point. And when you have the dark night of the soul, you get the implosion of your external reality and the explosion of your dream landscape. Now, the dream landscape actually gets bigger in size. This is what they taught him. We talked about this for many, many hours. The dream landscape gets bigger in size, and there's new objects that weren't there before, and they represent new potentials in your soul that you didn't have before. Now you can walk through it in all different ways, and again, the arrow of time is pointing in the direction you're facing. Another thing that they really insisted that you do is called inverse calisthenics. Okay? Now, what does that mean? Inverse calisthenics means that you have to do sit-ups hanging upside down. Now again, please, if you have any medical issues, you gotta be very gentle. Don't take a sudden risk and just flip upside down, because it can really make blood flow to your head. But there are these inverters that you have that are pretty safe if you do it carefully. And then you dangle upside down and you do sit-ups. And I've been doing this. I have an inverter at home. I'm not doing it here, but when I was home, and you want to go up nice and slow, just a nice slow burn, and you just go up there. Now what they said was your pineal gland starts to have a much greater amount of blood flowing through it because of the calisthenics, and the more blood goes through your pineal gland, the more psychic you are. Now here's the one other thing that he said that, and I'm just giving it all to you. I'm not selling this. It's all free. But here it is. Okay, vegans are going to hate me, but they always gave these guys the best steaks, because apparently if you have really nicely grown organic meat, and especially if it's only been 5 days or less since it was quote-unquote harvested, at that point, when you're eating that, apparently your psychic ability increases very dramatically. The very likely reason for that is the activator X that's in those things, which Dr. Weston Price, again, if you've heard me talk about that, a dentist who went to all these blue zones where people had never gotten Western food and they were eating traditional food, and they didn't have there was less than one cavity per 1,000 teeth. Everybody had perfect teeth, no heart disease, no diabetes, no cancer. Everybody's healthy, everybody's psychic. So those are all the basic things that he said. Inverse calisthenics, activator X, the dream landscape, quiet point meditation, and clustering. Okay, that's really all. He said that's all they had to do, and you just had to do these things. But when you have that dark night of the soul, when you have the implosion of your external landscape and the explosion of your internal landscape, your dream landscape gets bigger. This is one of the most fascinating things they taught in the psychic training program. They said that you are now fulfilling what you were here in this life to achieve. Normally, people don't get through their dream landscape in one lifetime. They keep running through the same cycle. The arrow of time goes in the direction they're facing. They don't learn very much. And so when you actually have that dark night of the soul and your internal landscape explodes, you've downloaded new information that sets you off on a whole new trajectory. And now you're in this whole new reality where you're going beyond what your soul might have thought you were capable of doing in one lifetime. When you bring in energy that is beyond what you would have had in one lifetime, you bring in power. Okay, it's about the power. It's about the spiritual power. Unfortunately, the rules apparently work the same whether you use it for good or evil. Evil people can meditate and use black magic and get it to work. It's about the will. It's about the focused direction of the will. I don't recommend doing anything like that, but you can use it positively as well. So getting back to these scores, okay, he said that typical people, this is what the program taught him, typical people on the P scale are like a P0, meaning they don't have any psychic ability at all. As you become more psychic, you go P1, P2, P3, P4. Natural psychics are people who just have it come naturally. They didn't get this training. They didn't do clustering. They didn't necessarily do the inverse calisthenics or any of this other stuff. It came to them on their own. Their research said that nobody that was a natural ever got above a P4. But in the Psi-Corps, if you train in this science, you can get P5, P6, P7, and anything above like a 6, you could be a wet worker, which again, I don't recommend doing this because it's very, very bad karma. But you know, they could pinch the carotid artery in the neck and cause a stroke. And this apparently is used all the time. You will have psychic shielding based on your karma. So these people cannot do this to you unless you're vulnerable. And that also has to do with the rules of engagement on planet Earth and anywhere in the universe. They can't, no negative force can do anything to you unless you authorized it. You have to be the one that says, I accept this karma, by basically inviting it through your own actions. It's really sad, therefore, looking at the world right now, that people are not getting the message and they're acting in a very combative way. And there's a lot of anger and there's a lot of hatred and there's a lot of depression. And that's not going to help you. You got to be able to keep your frequencies high, because that's one of the whole tricks to this stuff. So, yeah, we go on and on about the psychic training program, but we were talking about the television shows that we watched together. So when you watch Babylon 5, and it was very uncanny, they use the same exact nomenclature on the show, P1 through P10, and they use teeps and teaks as well. And that blew me away. Another example of this was, apparently he said at one point that when you're on the chair and you're looking into the past, that there's a way to do like a mind's eye view of it where you're looking at it without going, and that created a little orb that some people could see, and they had a very exaggerated, funny name for it. It was called an OBIT, or Outer Band Individuated Teletracer. And I said, hey Bruce, let's just look that up online. And so sure enough, I typed it in, and there's actually an episode of an old black and white television show called The Outer Limits, called Outer Band Individuated Teletracer. That was amazing. There was a show that he said, I guess it was in the 1960s, called The Time Tunnel, and it's total disclosure. So I would also recommend going back and watching that show. There's a tunnel in the show, and it's black and white, spirals going through a tunnel, and he said that was called a TVG. And as soon as he said TVG to me, I said time vector generator, and I was right. And he was amazed when I did that. So the time vector generator is a whole other thing. But you generate, if you want to, what they would try to do is create a future that they want to have, and they use the TVG to send energy to magnetize that timeline. So he said, it sounds crazy, but once we really get into time travel, anything is possible. The other show that we watched was Stargate SG-1. And according to Bruce, Stargate SG-1 is true. That they were, it was sort of a combination of stuff that he was doing with the time travel stuff with Montauk, and stuff that they were doing through what they called the Ancient Stargate Network. Now, what is the Ancient Stargate Network? The Ancient Stargate Network, so he claimed, that there's a global grid of energy vortexes on Earth. You've seen me talk about this before. I talked about it in Great Awakening. And in these certain particular areas of the Earth, if you're there at the right time, on the right day, with the right alignments, which has to do with the positions of the planets in the solar system, especially if there's a solar flare happening, and the solar flare is aimed at the Earth while you're in the right alignment. And then there's also these grids that we don't know about that can be tracked, and they move slowly across the surface of the Earth. Everything has to line up. The other big piece is an ancient megalithic stone monument, because I remember I was talking about charge clusters before, and I was talking about how you send this electrical current off the tip of a needle, it makes this little ball, and the ball will now repel gravity, and the ball has all this energy in it, and it'll deradiate. Well, it also is a time portal. So these little balls will also travel in time. Like I said, anti-gravity is time travel. So the Earth makes these little balls all the time, and they preferentially come up through these particular areas of the Earth that are called the grid nodes, or the global grid. The Earth, the core of the Earth is actually plasma. It's not an iron ball. Plasma creates magnetic fields. That's also what Kenneth Shoulders discovered with the charge cluster technology. Magnetism can exist on one of these little electrical balls with nothing else to generate the magnetic field. So there is extra magnetism in these grid nodes on Earth, and another insider, the guy who I call Jacob, told me that the way that they used to find these portals, these natural vortexes, is they'd have a little metallic tuning fork with magnets on it. And the tuning fork is joined at the bottom, so it's like a Y. And the magnets, but it's very sensitive. The metal is very thin. The magnets can either come together or farther apart depending on how much magnetic attraction there is. And so when you go into a vortex, they go like this. They start coming together because there's more magnetic energy. So when you have a geomagnetic anomaly, when you have extra magnetism in a particular area of the Earth, you get the possibility that these little guys from inside the Earth's center, these little balls, that are, again, like the Terletsky quadrigae, where gravity turns into electromagnetism and it shields time, and so you get all this funny stuff. Really amazing book, by the way, by Jenny Randles called Time Storms, where she describes people encountering these orbs and having time shifts, where like you're like somebody's smoking a cigarette and their hand is moving slow and the smoke is moving too slow, and then other people's voices sound like, that kind of stuff. These things happen naturally, and people sometimes get portaled through time, in quite natural ways. Apparently you can detect that with these little magnetic tuning forks. The magnets come together more, and oh, there we go, there's one. The stone monuments, actually, because of the nature of matter, the nature of reality, the pyramid functions like a funnel. And I've talked about this extensively. Gravitation has a spin to it. That's the big secret. The spin is where the dimensions are hidden. The spin is where time is powered from. And the spin is what you have to use for consciousness. Spin is the field of consciousness, actually. Gravitational spin is the secret to consciousness, biological life. That's all the Russian science that I've been talking about since the late 1990s, when I started to learn about this, through academic research. Anyway, when these bubbles come up from inside the Earth, you can capture them inside a pyramid or a stone circle like Stonehenge. And that's why, in the 1970s, at Stonehenge, there was a group of hippies tenting and camping inside Stonehenge. And the farmer didn't like that, and so he called the cops. And the farmer and the police were walking towards Stonehenge. They see lightning hit the stones. It starts glowing blue inside. The kids start screaming. It goes to blinding white light in a bubble, a half bubble that covered the whole area of Stonehenge. And then it went, and then there was nobody left inside Stonehenge, and there was only smoldering tent pegs, smoke coming off of them where their tents were, and everybody was gone. That's an example of Stonehenge getting activated for its intended purpose. It's built on the grid. A bubble comes up from inside the Earth. It's a time bubble, and you can travel through time with it if you can capture it, so the stones capture the bubbles, suck them in, and if you have the right alignment, you could actually get the portals to work. Now, usually, people on Earth were not using these to travel anywhere. What would happen is that there were ceremonial dates that they were told to come to those locations, and they would all pray because their consciousness would make it work better and attract these bubbles. The ETs then portal in, and you meet with them, and they talk to you, and they teach you things, and they tell you when to come back, and then they leave. Because for them, this is just another way to do time travel. And when I was talking about, all of these different military bases where they have time portals that they're actually using right now in classified programs, they're all located on the grid. So when you look at the grid nodes, where these nodes are on the Earth's geomagnetic grid, there's almost always going to be a military base there, because you can't just time travel anywhere. You got to have the right kind of stuff. If you have the right technology, though, you don't need to wait for an alignment. You can pretty much do it whenever you want. But you can't just travel through a portal anywhere you want. You have to be in the right area. Plasma filaments go through the universe, and you can portal into them and travel much faster than the speed of light, because light is not actually a barrier that we can't get beyond. When you go into these wormholes, traversable wormholes, this stuff does work. And again, you can travel through space and time. And with the ship, when it has enough of the big power system, you create your own portal anywhere you want, create where you want to go, fly through space and time to get there. Okay, so this is what they called the ancient Stargate network. Again, going back to the slide here. And the ancient Stargate network is something that they discovered. Each planet in our galaxy and beyond has its own native Stargate, and there was a group of beings that they call the Elders, and the Elders would travel through these portals. So the one that we had on Earth was in Antarctica, it started out in Egypt, and I guess they dug it up in, I think it's 1923. But the show, Stargate SG-1, tells you exactly what happened. The movie and then the show. The show is more important than the movie, by the way. The show has tons and tons of stuff. Bruce and I watched all of them, all the way through. And everything that they're talking about is related to something that's true. So the Goa'uld are the reptilian Dracos. So when you see Stargate SG-1, at the beginning these beings have these masks on where they look like cobra heads. And then the cobra head pops open and there's a human being inside. That's the symbolic thing to say that it's a reptilian being. And then of course they also have these snakes that get into their neck and wrap around the spinal cord. That part's not true, but it again is the reptilian analogy. So all that stuff about the Goa'uld is based on the reptilians. And then they had, in the later seasons, the replicators, which is an AI, predatory artificial intelligence with nanorobots. That's all true, apparently. He was very excited about an episode called The Nox. Said that the Nox represented a certain type of real extraterrestrials. Yeah, there was a group that was the Aesir. That's what he called them, A-E-S-I-R, Aesir. And in the show, they're called Asgard. Apparently, those are real beings, and they're here in our local realities. He talked about this ancient Stargate network, and what he said was that it is a very real thing that we have a ring that was dug up in Egypt, that there's a dialing device, just like in the show, and you dial in coordinates of where you want to travel, and it will take you there. But the funny part is, it wouldn't allow you to bring any metallic objects, and nothing inorganic could make it through the portal. When you do this portal ride, it's a very dizzying wormhole ride where you see the wormhole, you're in this tunnel of light, you're screaming and waving your arms, and you're going through, and it's twisting and turning, as depicted in the movie Stargate, as depicted in other movies. And when you get to the other side, you're now on the planet that you dialed in. The code is based on a number system, because numbers are universal. So he actually did tell me what our local Stargate address is, believe it or not. There's another thing I wanted to share with you that's fairly new, unless you've really, really studied my stuff. I held this back for many, many years because I wanted to see if anybody had the real information. This is our Stargate address, and it's been so long, I'm not entirely sure the 84 and the 24 are right, but I'm pretty sure that this is it because it's been so long. But anyway, these represent sectors of space. So 7 is something big in the universe. We're in the 7th piece of something that's got 10 sections. And again, you look at the dodecahedron or the icosahedron, the sacred geometry I talk about, it evenly divides up into 10 sections. That apparently is what this is. So we're in section 7, section 5, section 3, then section 84, which is going to be 1 out of 100, section 70. Now, the 606 is actually Earth's local address. So if you only want to make a short trip, all you have to do is dial in the 3-digit number. Mars is 605, and the Aesir, or what they called Asgard on the show, that is the gate address of number 1. So number 1 is very old because they're around a pulsar, and apparently it makes their planet last a really long time without any changes like we would have with solar flash and that kind of stuff going on. So anyway, he also said that people were channeling the Asgard, and then they got the name wrong and they called it Ashtar because their mind didn't quite hear the word right. And that's where the Ashtar command stuff from the 1950s apparently came from. Some of it. A lot of it was probably fake. Some of it was probably genuine telepathic contact. The gates are not a universal thing that's just fixed. They are made by these beings that are very ancient but time travel, so they're basically like always around, and they call these beings the Elders. The Elders uphold the Stargates. Every planet has a native Stargate. Ours was in Egypt. That's what the Stargate SG-1 show is disclosing. The truth, according to Bruce, is that they actually buried it in Antarctica because they were worried about something dangerous getting through that could hurt life on Earth, and then they developed their own method. The other problem is, if you travel through an ancient Stargate, you're going to get screwed up. In fact, let's go to that slide right now. Most people who traveled through these gates were permanently damaged. It is not, it's such a psychologically overwhelming thing to have this happen to you that people can't handle it, they freak out, and they basically come out schizophrenic and they're babbling and crazy. So it's because we don't have the integration between spirit and body to handle that trip. It snaps the link between the mind and the body. And so that gets into another really, really interesting thing that they discovered in the course of this time research. And that is what they call the ZTR. And again, if you studied my stuff a long time ago, you might have heard this. So don't hate me for repeating anything, but this is very important I include this. The ZTR is the linkage between your soul and your body. And that linkage normally occurs at the time that you were born. Your soul and your body are one. So when they tell you to meditate and go back to your quiet point, and they tell you to cluster, and as you cluster down, you get down to where your parents were and the trauma that your parents gave you because you saw them as God. When you resolve that trauma, when you can forgive your parents, you can go back to, psychologically and spiritually, you can dial it back to the moment you were conceived, where you have your zero time reference. This is where your soul and your body are one. You have to go back there to be able to do any of this advanced psychic stuff that they teach you in the training programs. Okay? You have to be able to go back to your ZTR, which means you have to deal with your childhood trauma. If you don't, you're not going to make it. The ZTR is a very, very fascinating thing because when they started to send people through the tunnels that the Montauk chair was making, if they sent people into the future from where they were in 1981, let's say, you very rapidly, in less than a day, age to the age that you would be at that time in history. And they didn't know why this was, but it was very deadly because you could die if you go significantly beyond your natural age. So like if you send somebody through who's 70 and you send him 30 years in the future, now he's going to be 100. If he's not naturally going to live to 100, it's very dangerous. So they had various extraterrestrial societies they were supposedly working with because, again, in the inside world, there's ETs everywhere. This is part of what we're going to get when we get full disclosure. There's a lot of different ETs that have been working with us for a long, long time. And when you go into the future, your body ages to prevent time paradoxes. You won't be able to live if you don't have a special treatment. So what is the treatment? Remember I said TVG, time vector generator? Well, it turns out that you can alter your ZTR with these certain extraterrestrial technologies. You can snap it deliberately to set your ZTR at the age so that you're the same age where you end up going as the age that you are now. In other words, your ZTR, so if you're 40 years old, let's say, and you know that you're going to go to the year 2025, you're 40 years old, then you go back 40 years, which I guess would be 1985. So 1985 is when you would set the ZTR. So now you were born in 1985, you shifted it. This apparently can be done with this technology. You use the TVG, you pump in energy to shift it to 1985. So now when you travel to 2025, you're safe. Okay? That's how it actually works. And you also have these belt packs that they give people to keep you in your zero time reference. It keeps stimulating you to hold it in the place that it needs to be. So you have to have that with you, I guess, in order for this to work. That's one of the things. And it's all programmed now. So, but they use time travel very infrequently. Since this started in the early 1980s, they only are using maybe about 5,000 people a decade in these time travel programs. But it's really cool because one of these time travel programs is the plan that they transmitted back into the past in the 1950s, seeing the scope of the problem, seeing how to get through it, and building that binder that's 5 inches thick. That's how it was done. So let's see. If you go into the past, you can also shift your time, your ZTR, zero time reference, you can shift it backwards. So you can go into the past and make it and stay alive. What Bruce didn't really have that the new briefings have given me is the knowledge of these spheres, which in Stargate SG-1, they had a little machine they'd send out, and the machine would take a look, and it was this little thing on wheels. Well, they had to make it look conventional for the show, but in reality, it's a sphere. It's a chrome sphere about 14 inches wide, and it can look at television signals, audio signals. It has weapons capability. It can defend itself. And they would send that first through the tunnel, take a look around. It has a live video feed because, again, time doesn't exist. and they use this quantum correlation. Pete Peterson taught me a lot about how this works, and I'll give you some of the technical detail, again, to show you how complex this stuff gets. According to Pete Peterson, the basic system of quantum entanglement requires a particular electrical component called a diode. A diode is, if you've studied electronics, you know that a diode only allows current to pass through in one direction. So it stops it from backflowing. What you would do in this particular technology is you would overload the diode. You give it too much energy so that it starts to have a bidirectional flow. It doesn't just go in one direction anymore. It goes both directions. It's about to melt down, and so that's the point they call avalanche. When you avalanche the diode, it's going to melt down. So by overloading the diode at an exact frequency, you can then overload another diode at the exact same frequency at a different place in space and in time. Okay? And now there's quantum entanglement, quantum correlation between this diode over here and this diode over here, even if this one's in the future and this one's in the past. So according to Pete Peterson, I'm probably going to get in a lot of trouble for saying this, man. Apparently these diodes are already in a lot of our technology, all our phones, all our computers. They already have this non-local quantum system that they built that Pete was involved in inventing. But the quantum correlation, they perfected it to the point where they can send video and audio, because it's just like broadband. Once you've created once you have the two matching frequencies, you get a quantum entanglement between the two diodes, and they link between space and time. And then at that point, you can pump all kinds of signals through, and then it rides the fluctuations, and the fluctuations you create over here come in over here, so you get wireless transmission across time. Wi-Fi through time. That's what the Orion Cube is using. That's what they were doing without realizing what they were really doing in the Philadelphia experiment, which is true. Jerry Vassilatos has an amazing thing that he wrote about that in his book. It's in my first book, Source Field Investigations. So the quantum entanglement is incredibly, incredibly exciting, because I didn't realize until the new briefings that it sends video through time, but of course it makes sense. If you can send data at all, you can send video data, because you can reduce it to zeros and ones. So what they would do is they would send these spheres through, do some reconnaissance, look at where they're going to go, and then they also had, the guys would have their own little QCDs, which is like a little BlackBerry kind of thing. It apparently does have a little keyboard on it that's a physical keyboard that you push with your fingers. It's not like an iPhone. And you can film, and you can do audio, and you can communicate with your ground team, and you'll see them, and you can have a voice chat, even though you're in the past and they're in the future. So that little piece added so much and explained what was really going on with Bruce. And of course, he didn't have the need to know. He didn't get all this stuff, but it all connects very nicely. So they can send you into the past, and you can talk to them, and they can see where you are. You don't bring any technology with you. That's a very important point. When you do time travel, you don't bring anything with you. And these guys would go into it. They can make a time bubble where you can spend a long time learning certain information, and then you come out and it's like you never left. So you might spend 6 months or a year learning ancient Latin. Once they've sent these spheres in, they look at Rome, and they look at ancient Rome, and they say, okay, this is how people are talking. We've analyzed the language. This is the dialect. This is their accent. These are the colloquialisms. These are the funny words they use. This is a curse word, And so you learn it from the direct observation of the spheres. Which, by the way, the spheres were depicted in the movie Oblivion with Tom Cruise very prominently. They also show up in They Live. Once the people put those the sunglasses on in the movie They Live, if you haven't seen it, I definitely recommend it. That's when they could see the little sphere going around, which you can't see with the naked eye. All that stuff is true, except again, the spheres are actually featureless on the outside to make it less obvious what they are if they ever crash, which apparently sometimes they do. Some people see orbs, and a lot of times these things will glow, So people see glowing orbs hovering over. That might be one of these surveillance devices, actually. And again, in this world, time doesn't really exist, and the extraterrestrials have mastered this eons ago, and we get the technology. So the Time Tunnel show talks about some of this early research. It does appear that they were kind of playing around with it, maybe in the 60s and 70s, but they really had no idea what they were doing from Philadelphia experiment stuff. They didn't really nail this down until Montauk in the early 80s, and then all the programs that branched off of that. There was a conference that was held in the Black Ops community every year called the Sigma Conference, and that's where they were doing the think tank on the time travel stuff and figuring out how it works. Bruce told me about that. I don't know if he ever went to the Sigma conferences or not, but I know that he knew people who did. So getting into one of the things that I really was going to cover, one of the main topics that I was going to cover is in certain military bases, and this is stuff that multiple sources from the Alliance have now asked us to disclose. In certain military bases, they have QCDs under very heavy guard, lock and key, need to know, multiple security checkpoints. It's not easy to get in there. You have to be able to have a reason. You have to sign off. You have to have a protocol. There's a whole elaborate system of how this works. But at certain times, you're allowed to go in there and fire up the QCD and talk to people in the future. And the people in the future are us. And those people in the future figured out how to defeat the Cabal and what was going to be necessary. How are we going to do this? What are the steps? And they transmitted that information back into the 1950s. Apparently, one of the missions that they did was to create a hub and send some people from the future back into these military bases in the 1950s, and with Eisenhower and these kind of people, gave them a QCD and said, keep this under lock and key, and we're going to give you these instructions. And then they transmitted the plan, the 5-inch binder, the book. They transmitted it through the QCD, which again, you overload a diode, you create the avalanche, you get quantum entanglement, and you jiggle it on this side in the past, in the 1950s. You jiggle it over here in 2029, and you can talk, video chat, and you can transmit documents and all that kind of stuff, and that's apparently how the plan was made. And so this is what the magic letter 17 was talking about when they were saying Project Looking Glass going forward in order to look back. And remember, they put a question mark after Looking Glass, so it's not really Looking Glass, it's actually these QCD devices, and that's what they're using. So this is really amazing, folks, because the plan is foolproof. Have you noticed that 17 keeps saying nothing can stop what is coming? Nothing. They say it over and over again, and we're all like, oh no, I hope, nothing bad happens, and I hope we're not all going to die and it's the end of the world. No, look. I've been getting this stuff about what we're going through right now. I've been getting these prophecies since 1996, and that's what my new book describes. All right, so getting back to my slides now, DARPA actually developed the IP addresses that we use on the internet from studying this gate network. So going back a couple slides, again, this is apparently our gate address, which is kind of similar to an IP address, although IP addresses are only 4 digits and they all are between 0 and 255. But apparently these guys in the classified programs developed the whole internet protocol that we're now using by studying this gate network. So the ancient gates were built for peaceful travel. You can't bring a weapon. Some guys tried, but it never worked. Some people lost dental work. If you've had recent dental work and it hasn't gotten your bio imprint, you might lose a filling in your teeth when you go through these old things. But the new stuff, the portals that we're talking about that are Montauk related, you don't go through a wormhole. You just walk in one side and out the other, and there's no big tube ride, which again makes you crazy. So in the beginning, they were sending homeless people through and they were dying, and then they eventually figured out how to get all this stuff to work and how to see where they were going, and learning about time paradoxes and how to prevent people from finding these ancient machines that could do this, of which there's apparently many of them all throughout time and space that people could find. And so now here we are, that they've transmitted this plan back to the 1950s, and we're seeing the plan get fulfilled. Well, I'm going back now to Stargate SG-1 to get back into my slides, and one of the most amazing things that Bruce ever showed me was this one episode of Stargate SG-1 called Wormhole Extreme. And this is actually a shot from the show in which they actually create a fake show. And notice the Stargate looks different. If you've seen the real show, the Stargate looks a little cheesier and cheaper. And then the people are, of course, different. And the guy that was Teal'c, the black guy, now he's all silver, which in reality he isn't. And it's very, very campy. And this guy is actually saying, what do you mean this isn't a real show? This is not a real show? You mean this isn't a real show? And so it's like they're really, really rubbing it in your face, teasing you by basically telling you like that it's actually real. Because you look at Stargate SG-1, you watch the credits, and they always say sponsored by the Department of Defense. So this is one of the things they put out there to get us acclimated to the truth. So the Wormhole Extreme episode is extremely weird because it's basically revealing that the show is not fiction. And that the people they're making fun of the people in the show. So the people in the show don't understand that everything that's going on is actually true. And I believe that the Stargate people, the real Stargate people, find out that the show was being made. And so there's this interesting crossover where it becomes pretty obvious, like they're almost like when a kid is lying, he covers his mouth. They're telling you that this is not fiction, but again, all of this will come out eventually when we get full disclosure. So getting back to the slides once more, we find out that time travel is routine. It's happening regularly for these specific purposes to stop paradoxes. And I only found out the details recently. That's one of the bulk of the things that I wanted to get through.
Okay, that's the video, friend. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you did, it really helps me out if you give the video a like. And also, it'd be great if you click the logo here in the top right-hand corner to subscribe to this channel. And hit the bell icon to be notified when we upload new videos. Alright, that's it for now. High vibes, high vibes, high vibes. Peace in the highest vibration. Yeah.